Can we go? I'm sorry? We good? Okay. Okay, good morning. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying Vegas. As you can tell, I think a lot of us have been enjoying Vegas this weekend. Our first panel coming up today is space flight and personal risk. We're going to talk about what would make a customer want to take that risk and what that means for the companies that will be actually flying them. And on our panel today, we have Kenneth Gosier, and he works in quantitative finance, supporting commodities trading at Barclays Capital in Manhattan, at NASA Goddard for 2 years, and is a member of the Space Adventures Spaceflight Club. We also have Mr. Randal Clahue. He works for X-Corp Aerospace as the government liaison. He also works as a safety officer and as the flight operations officer. He has helped write the commercial space launch amendment as well. Also, we have Reda Anderson. She is Rocket Plane's #1 customer, as she has already signed a contract in in June of 2004. She's also taken part in adventures such as fishing for piranhas in Brazil and going to the Titanic, and she is co-founder of the Society for Women's Adventures. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for being invited to speak here. I'd also like to thank my #1 hero, who is Peter Diamandis. I'm an adventurer, risk taker, and I have a lot of friends who do high-end adventures, but in my opinion, Peter Diamandis is #1 on my list of heroes. What have I done that is adventurous? Well, probably the riskiest thing I've ever done was in the 60s. I lived in San Francisco, in the Haight-Ashbury district. I lived in San Francisco, and I walked to Baker Beach, which is underneath the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, in order to watch a tidal wave come in. Now they call them tsunamis. And once you've done that and you've gotten soaking wet and survived, then you think, maybe this is a bit risky. The most fun thing I do is I like to go into the desert, both domestically and internationally. I do a lot of four-wheel driving. I like primitive camping, where somewhere and you can look 360 degrees around you and you are the only person there. There's quite a feeling of solitude and a personal feeling you get that you can't get anywhere else. I've led trips, 2 trips to Mongolia, to Peru, and various other parts of the world doing this. The most interesting thing I've done is diving to the Titanic, which was 1 year ago in July. The Titanic has had 100 people who have dived to the Titanic, and only 12 women. They've stopped the dives. The risk there with diving was that it's a Russian vehicle, designed by Russians, maintained by Russians, and these people on the ship only get about $40 a month. They don't have a lot of money for it to maintain this vehicle, and the reason they have stopped the dives. The most challenging thing I've ever done is being a real estate developer. In the early 80s, I started developing what's called infill property. And am I talking too? I'm too close. I've started. Am I too close? I started not knowing what real estate developers even do. I tore down a house and built an 11-unit apartment building. I've been successful in Southern California in real estate investments. Why space? I'm a newcomer to space. Knowing my background, a friend of mine emailed me in June of 2004 and said, Reda, there's something going on in Mojave that you might be interested in. I went out to Mojave. I was in a VIP area. There were only 20 of us, 15 to 20 in this area. My feet were a foot and a half from the tarmac, the taxiway, and we're the only people around, and I was amazed, aghast. Where are the people? Don't they realize if this man does what he says he's going to do, Burt Rutan, this event will change the world forever? So then I went to the September event and also to October. In October, I met John Spencer. And I was just as thrilled. When I went in June, I tend to get emotional and excited about things. I was crying, I was shaking, I was jumping up and down, I was yelling. I was instantly, passionately in love with space. I have not been interested in space before. It's not that I wasn't interested, it just kind of never was on my mind. I'm not like the majority of you here who have lived with this life. So in October, I met John Spencer. He invited me to the Space Frontier Foundation conference on the Queen Mary. I went there, and then I met, somebody introduced me to a man named Chuck Lauer. And as I'm talking to Chuck, Chuck's pretty tall, so I'm standing like there looking up at him, and he won't stop talking. I'm already want to go in space. I'm already sold as of June. I want to get on vehicle and go up there. So to me, 4 months, the best way to get something off your list is not put it on your list. So for me, 4 months of waiting in order to find somebody who will take me up in a vehicle was a very long time. So Chuck is standing there talking, and I'm trying to interrupt him to tell him to stop talking. I'm already sold, I already want to go, but I couldn't do that, so I interrupted him and I asked him for his business card. So he gave me his business card. A couple of you have heard this story. So when he gave me his business card, I took his business card as he's continuing to talk, and I wrote on the back of the business card, rocket plane #1 customer to go into space, blah, 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 and some other things, signed my name. I took a $1 bill, I wrapped it around the business card, and I put it in his hand. Chuck backs up. Oh, this has all the elements of a contract. Looks looks like we have our first rocket plane has its first customer in space, and that's how I happened to sign up. As far as we know, unless someone says otherwise, this was the first contract signed for a paying passenger to go into space on a non-governmental vehicle. Chuck has that in his safe. Okay, so I have that type of activity that I did with Chuck goes along with my favorite saying, which is opportunity knocks, but it doesn't open the door. You have a lot of opportunity, but a lot of times people don't take advantage of it. Life depends primarily on attitude and courage. Why would I want to go into space? Well, primarily the adventure. I'm a risk taker. I like taking risks. There's a certain amount of thrill that comes along with having a danger a day. And I like world-class events. But the primary reason I want to go into space is the view. I have read The Overview Effect. I thought it was an excellent book by Frank White, and it does describe the astronauts talking about when they come back, they feel like a life-changing event. When you go down to the Titanic, which is 12,500 feet down, takes you 2.5 hours to get to the bottom of the ocean, and you're in this cocoon, which is 6 feet wide, for 10 hours, you come back with a different feeling about your world. It's going to be the same when I go in space and I come back. What do I want? This talk is about risk. What do I want to reduce that risk? The first thing I want is safety, safety, safety. If it ain't safe, I ain't going. I'm interested in the mechanical operation of the plane, but obviously I have no mechanical background. But I do know that on anything that's possible, rocket plane is testing to destruction. That appeals to me, so they know how far this particular instrument or part of the plane will go. The design has a propulsion system. That means that it has both the jet and the rocket. So when I take off in this modified Lear jet and I go up 25,000 feet and then the button is hit in order to go into space and the rocket engages, if something happens with that rocket, that they can abort that and come down, engage the engines, and then I land on the tarmac. Aside from the actual plane, the most important thing is the pilot. I'm very concerned with what this pilot is about. They have selected a person who I feel is extremely competent, and I have a lot of confidence. They have selected a former astronaut, a former Navy test pilot. I have spoken one-on-one with John Harrington for hours, and I like his attitude with things. And if he has this, to me, I don't like the idea of crossover commercial airline pilots. Maybe they've had some training, but I like an astronaut I love an astronaut who's been in the extensively trained, and I feel the same with Rick Searfoss, who is the pilot for X-Corps. If you have either one of these men, you have a great pilot. That reduces risk, and you are safer, in my opinion. Some of the other things that are being bandied about are minor. Well, they're less important than the actual structure and the pilot, but my position is I don't want anything on this vehicle or on my body or in the plane or anywhere around that does anything to increase the risk in any way or that needs any attention. One of those things would be a spacesuit. I'm not a pretend type person. I'm used to, I like high-end anything, but I also understand the reality here. You do not need to dress me in some cumbersome spacesuit and put some gas mask on me for me to have an experience. That, to me, would detract from my experience. I think something could possibly go wrong with that. I don't want to bother with that. I don't want to be in that. A simple Nomex suit is fine. Another thing that's being discussed is that some of the vehicles are talking about releasing people once and they're floating to get the weightlessness experience. I have, thanks to Rocket Plane, they chartered a Lear jet for me and they took me up and I did a lot of these parabolas and I did feel the weightlessness. I like that very much. That's a great feeling. If you want to know what weightlessness feels like, you take one hand, you put your other hand on top. You can feel you can feel weight on your hand, but you can't feel anything on the top of your hand. That's what weightlessness feels. I do not want to be released in that seat when I get up there. I'm just maybe 1% considering loosening the belt, but I'm not even really truly into that. You can get this weightlessness feeling in another way. I consider these first vehicles, even though they're not classified by the FAA as being experimental, in my brain, these are experimental and risky vehicles. And I don't think you should be having someone, in Rocket Plane, there are 3 passengers and 1 pilot. So here I am in this 5-foot thing that I can't even stand up in, and you're going to take off my strap. I'm going to be floating around, and the pilot's going to come on the headphone and he's going to say, "We're experiencing a little turbulence. Will you please return to your seat?" I don't think so, and I'm going to panic, and I'm going to be hitting the top of the ceiling trying to get back in my seat and wondering what did he say to do to get back in my seat, and that is not a good idea to me, so I don't want to be released. Other things that we're doing for reducing risk is we're having some training. I mentioned the weightlessness training, simulators. We're going to be working with CAMI extensively. CAMI is Civil Aerospace Medical Institute. In Oklahoma, all of the commercial pilots go through some sort of training like this. Thanks again to Rocket Plane. I have had some of this training. It's absolutely fascinating what you go through. One of the other ways I reduce the risk factor is by knowing what's going on as much as I can. Attending conventions like this, visiting Rocket Plane, which has an open shop. What's in the future? I had a conversation with Rocket Plane, and I asked them, what is this about this round-trip ticket? I didn't ask for a round-trip ticket. They sold me one. I don't want to go up and come down in Oklahoma City. What's that about? I want to go up in Oklahoma, come down in Mojave, or I want to go to Dubai, or I want to go to Japan. Each one of these places has a different view. If anyone wants to know more about what's going on, so in other words, I'm a repeat customer. Don't treat me, when you make something, you don't want somebody just to come one time. You've got to find out what the customer wants, give them what they want, and they're going to come. If you want to find out more about what's going on, there were 2 magazines this month, the August issues of both the Rob Report, which is a very high-end magazine, and also Popular Science magazine, articles featuring Rocket Plane and Reda Anderson. I thank you very much for your lifelong interest in space so that I, the interloper, can come in and enjoy what you've been doing all your life. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Ken Gosier. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about how I'm involved with all this kind of stuff. I'm a member of the Spaceflight Club with Space Adventures, which is it's kind of an innovative way for people to be able to take part in stuff like this. The way that it works is you put up $1,000 every year, which is a relatively small amount of money, and you get to take part in lots of very interesting events. Like at ISDC, they had a private dinner at Dennis Tito's house. They had Greg Olson give a talk at the Explorers Club in New York City. They're organizing a private tour to go and see the Dice-K launch. And so I was just explaining to Reda yesterday that I'm not yet fabulously wealthy like some people are, so this is a nice way to be involved while I'm working my way up there. Yeah. So the other thing about Space Adventures is one of the things about their business model is they get to contract out with lots of other shops. So I'm still kind of in the process of deciding how exactly, where exactly, who exactly I want to go with. One of the elements there is who has the overall best experience, and I'm looking around at that right now. Obviously, at ISDC in May, Virgin got up and they gave a very slick presentation. They're just really cool. So they obviously have some draw. Yesterday, actually, we had Reda and I actually had a very nice conversation with Chuck Clahue and with George French about Rocket Plane, and they're very open, and they invited me to come out and see their plant sometime. So that's obviously, it'll be great to learn more about them also. One thing, the Russians are obviously very experienced in this field. One thing I believe that Reda told me actually yesterday was that for their zero-G flights, if you go over to Russia, they actually have a larger plane and they have fewer people on that plane. So, but then you have to get over to Russia, so there's different draws there. In terms of personal risk and stuff like that, the thing that I was going to talk about is just different things that companies can do to make people feel a little bit more safe. Because there's kind of 2 components to all of this. There's the actual risk involved, and then there's how you make people feel about the risk involved. And the more you can make people feel safer, along with all of your engineering studies and everything you do, then that obviously helps your business. So the first thing I was going to say is just to be very open about the whole testing and engineering process. One thing, this kind of goes a little bit counter to usual business practice. You want to show people your successes. Michael Mealing actually had a very interesting comment to me the other day about how on their corporate website, the one that they show to investors and stuff like that, they talk about all these great things they're doing and everything. But then at the same time, they have a blog that kind of all the geeks go to, and they're actually giving the blow-by-blow of what went wrong, what went right, and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of a fine line that you have to walk with being very open, but then not scaring away your investors. Yeah, the other thing is just, again, to be very open. We had a very nice conversation yesterday for a good 30 or 45 minutes with George French and with Chuck Lauer, where they told me many things that I didn't know about Rocket Plane. I guess at CAMI, the medical place, they're actually working together with the FAA to develop standards and develop like a medical database about what happens to people when they go up, and that's quite interesting. They also pointed out some other things I didn't know, like one thing me a little bit is just that they have a single pilot going up on their plane, you know, so, I mean, he's a great guy, but, you know, he's a single guy, so, I mean, you know, he may have an embolism or something like that, so who knows what will happen. But one thing that George actually pointed out to me is that he's actually a redundant system in some sense, because the computer is kind of the main control, and he's kind of there to monitor the computer. Yeah, in terms of being very open, I actually, post-X Prize, the Discovery Channel actually came out with 2 specials on scaled composites and all the stuff that they're doing, and I thought that was actually quite interesting because after the X Prize, they kind of showed you all the things that went wrong along the way. You know, I guess on one of the landings, there was one of the landing gear collapsed, and one time going up, they had a problem with their avionics software and stuff like that. So the fact that they were able to deal with this and keep moving along, I actually found kind of interesting. And you know, the more that I know, the safer I feel. The other thing to talk about is just all the failure tests that go on. It was actually very interesting to see all the burst tests at Bigelow's place the other day, and also George French had told me some of the burst tests that they had done with rocket plane. And this is actually kind of in a contrast to NASA, because I guess after the Columbia accident, the board wanted them to give up some of their, I guess their carbon tiles to actually do some failure tests on it with the foam, and NASA didn't want to give it up. So that just shows a kind of difference in attitude, which helps with the perception of safety. The other thing that we did agree on, just talking with Reda yesterday, was that the actual test pilots involved will put people very much at ease. There is John Harrington, there is Rick Searfrost. As I believe that Brian Binney is a former former fighter pilot who flew in the first Gulf War, and so it's kind of from the same mold. And so if these guys can go up and do 20, 30, 40 test flights, and they're starting to feel very good about it, then, you know, no failures in 50 test flights. I mean, you know, the obvious contrast is with the shuttle, you know, which has a failure about 1 every 50 flights or so. Yeah, and the other thing, just to kind of hand off to Randal a little bit, is I enjoy learning. I'm working in finance, but I have kind of a geek mindset, so I enjoy learning lots of details and stuff like that. The one thing that I want to know more about with different companies is how do they actually model the probability of failure, and how do they actually do all their tests. There is kind of a quote from Burt Rutan saying that he wants Spaceship Two to be at least as safe as an airliner from the 1930s era. That implies some probability of you know, a catastrophic failure in so many flights. And actually I was just going to ask Randal if he could talk a little bit, along with all of his other stuff, about how exactly you model all of that. So that was my spiel.
Okay, are we live? Okay. Anybody doesn't know me, I'm Randal Clegg. I'm with X-Core Aerospace. I'm the government liaison. That's what's on my business card. The only reason I have a job title is that if you liaison with the government and you don't have a job title, they don't grok. They just are not able to think about what you're doing. I'm also the safety officer, flight ops, janitor, change cat box. We're very multitasking at X-Corp. And I actually have some comments about what Rita and Ken were talking about, but I'll get to that at the end of my highly prepared remarks here. Rick Tumlinson likes to say, "Welcome to the revolution." I'm a safety officer. I say welcome to the evolution. And this is going to be kind of indirect, so bear with me. George Neild was up here yesterday from the FAA talking about safety, and George is the Deputy Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation. He runs the RLV side of AST. When he was speaking yesterday, he was not representing Uncle Sam. He is Uncle Sam. The lady that signs the launch license works for George Neild. And what he had to say was pretty much common sense. Probably didn't surprise anybody here, but we're all libertarians here. And so the guy in charge was saying things that made sense to libertarians. How weird is that? And that he was doing that, I think, is a tribute to the Space Frontier Foundation, which has been working for many years to change the conversation and has succeeded to the point that government is no longer thinking in terms of, we have to regulate you, we have to tell you what to do, RLV industry, to regulate safety. They can't regulate safety. They don't know how. The best government can do as far as regulating safety is bring the industry up to space shuttle standards. In other words, if they were to regulate safety, they'd be requiring us to kill people. We refuse to do that. When George was talking, I could tell that there were a few people in the audience that thought the approach was a little too hands-off in terms of protecting the safety of the spaceflight participants. The reason for that is that we have to evolve that level of safety. And what Congress has directed FAA to do is ensure a continuous improvement in safety, because the current space safety record is just unsatisfactory. I mean, you know, we lost 2 crews and 113 flights. As a purely practical matter, if an RLV developer were to do that, he'd go broke. It takes about 100 flights to pay for an RLV. If you crash more than 1% of your flights, you're going to go broke. So that's, you know, from a purely economic standpoint, that sets the bottom line for our safety. We can't crash more than 1 in 100. Frankly, if we don't do a lot better than that, we're going to lose all our customers to our competitors, who are going to do better than that. I assume. I'm sure that's what they're trying for. Let's see. It's difficult to describe how revolutionary the current approach is, the current government approach. Governments, just as a matter of their metabolism, governments eat freedoms and excrete forms. It's not evil, it's just how they function. And yet that's not what Congress has directed FAA to do, because they know that they don't know how to be safe without grounding the fleet. Let's see. So what we're doing, to get back to my original point, we are evolving safety. We're not designing the vehicle down to the last detail and then building it and going to fly it, because that doesn't work, as NASA has proved. You know, we start out, we do flight tests, 30, 50, 100, something like that, something in that neighborhood, before you go to service. And then you do the next vehicle, probably has better performance, probably has better safety record. You know, we did the Easy Rocket, we've retired it because we don't like how difficult it is to operate. The next vehicle is going to be much easier to operate. That's probably going to improve its safety because it's going to improve its reliability. Somebody was talking, actually I think it was George yesterday, was talking about passengers. We don't fly passengers. We're not going to fly passengers. Passengers are people who take passage on a common carrier to go from point A to point B. We're not going to go from point A to point B. We're going to go from point A up into space, back down to point A. Nobody's taking passage anywhere. The reason these people are going to get on that bird is that they want to participate in a space flight. So I don't use the term passenger, I use the term participant. And I like to avoid the word passenger because there are connotations about liability and such things. Warsaw Convention versus the Outer Space Treaty. Informed consent is the key to safety for the spaceflight participant. The legal types talk about a duty to warn, and they're usually talking about lead in the drinking water or something. For spaceflight participants, the risks are rather higher than the risk of lead in the drinking water. The Russians told Dennis Tito he had a 1 in 50 chance of not coming back. He wanted to go. That was an acceptable risk to him. He came back. It worked. When it comes to the safety of the spaceflight participant and the personal risk that they're willing to accept, for one, I was very glad to hear Reda talking about safety, safety, safety. That's what I want in a customer. I want the customer insistent on safety. because we're all on the same page. Yes. Lord knows I have engineers that like performance. I like safety. I usually win the argument. But in terms of the ethics of the risks that the spaceflight participant is willing to assume, you don't go too far before you run up against what I call the D.D. Harriman problem. I'm sure everybody here has read Heinlein. For anybody who hasn't, D.D. Harriman was basically the guy in the Heinlein story who invented spaceflight. But he had a heart condition and he couldn't go. And decades went by and he wanted to go and he wanted to go. And he finally got to the point that he was able to go. And his board of directors got an injunction against him because if he went, he would die and the company would suffer. They actually got the injunction. He violated the court order. He hired a tramp steamer fare and he flew to the moon and he died there. He gave that crew his informed consent. By the current legal regime, that was perfectly okay, but it presents an ethical problem. Would I fly D.D. Harriman? Would I fly somebody who is not going to survive the flight, or who has a very low probability of surviving the flight? And my take was no. I spent 9 years in the Marine Corps, killed anybody. I don't want to start now. And I went to my boss and presented him with the question and my answer, and he talked me around. He said, no, informed consent truly is the ethical answer. If the guy knows what the risks are and accepts them, no matter what those risks are, if he accepts them, what right do we have to deny him his dream? So our position is we'd do the best to keep him alive. We'd try and talk him out of it. I personally would try to send the guy down the street. I was talking to George French about this a couple of days ago, and I won't tell you what his answer was, but Rocket Plane has an objective criterion for whether or not they would fly a participant. And so, you know, obviously if the guy's not going to do well, you want to fly him with a paramedic, a doctor or something. So I'd send him down to Rocket Plane or Virgin or somebody else, because we're just a two-seater, a pilot and participant. But yeah, if you want to go and you know the risks, whatever they are, we're going to do the best we can for you. But if you want to go, you can go. And my last thing, because I know that space buffs are also trivia buffs, part of the informed consent regime is what is the existing safety record of suborbital rockets. I'm just wondering if anybody here has any idea how many suborbitals there have been. And come talk to me after. I think you'll be shocked by the answer. And to respond to a couple things that Rita and Ken were talking about, different companies have different approaches toward the details of what the spaceflight experience is going to be. Rita was talking about unstrapping. Bert and Sir Richard have been adamant that their people are going to be able to unstrap. First they said they were going to be able to unstrap and float around. I think they must have done some simulations or rethought that, because now that what they're saying is they're going to be able to unstrap and float out of their seats. They're not actually going to get out of their seats. And I'm with Rita. When you fly aboard Xeris, you're staying in the seat. You're not loosening your seat belt. You're not loosening your harness. You're not taking off your helmet. You're in this pressure suit. You got the helmet. You're staying in your seat. You don't want the risk. And frankly, neither do you. And if you do, then you can go talk to Virgin. They're going to let you unstrap and float around in your seat. If the operator lets you get out of your seat completely, not strapped in, he's got to have a steward aboard. That's one less paying passenger. So you got to look at what's cost effective, and that's a decision for every different developer. We are going to put our participants in pressure suits because we're human. We're imperfect. We know that sooner or later we're going to have a leak of some sort, probably lose the cabin pressure in 3 hours. It's a 20-minute flight. It probably won't matter. We don't want to rely on just one system. We want redundant, it's life support. You want redundant systems. And as far as, Ken had a question of who he would fly with. There's X-Corps, there's the Russian outfit, I forget their name. There's Virgin, there's Rocket Plane, is anybody else? Just the four? Right, Blue Origin, Armadillo's going to eventually go into it, Maston's eventually going to offer space tourism services. And you can look at all these different things as to what everybody's going to offer a different experience, and everybody's going to have a different emphasis, and which is just fantastic because it gives the customer more choices. And the last thing is that Ken was talking about test piloting, and our thing is we want the test pilot to get bored. Yeah, just like we do when we run the engines. If on a brand new engine, it's not boring, but like with the T-Cart, we're up to almost 1,500 firings on the T-Cart engine. After 5 seconds, we get bored. We did a run of 1,000 consecutive ignitions to demonstrate reliability on the new igniter. It's boring. It took all day. We had the intern do it. And that's what you want. It's we have a saying that boring is beautiful because it means you don't have to worry. It's just going to work. And that's what you're looking for. I think that's all I had.
Do you want to talk, Ken?
I guess maybe you might ask some,
Can we take some questions?
I have a lot to say.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. The first thing I'm interested in saying is that if anything happens, for instance, to me, because I have control, I guess, over that comment, the last thing I want is for this industry to stop. You are on a roll. The train has left the station. You're on the train. You're going along. Do not stop this industry. If anything happens, try to help each other and figure out what is wrong and continue. Don't miss the beat. Don't slow down. As far as signing these forms, these informed consent forms that people are talking about, I don't even feel I have to read the thing, whatever they want me to sign. If you're going up in this vehicle and you don't know that you could die there or be mystified and never come back to Earth, and if your family doesn't know that and they're not used to what your personality is like anyway, what are you doing in this vehicle? Then you're the type of person who ought to wait until this vehicle does become more safe. But the first however many, this vehicle is not 100% safe. We don't know about this vehicle. It's the same with any new venture you might go into. I like not being a tourist, being a passenger. I like the term participant. We're not tourists here. We're not going to go up there and spend time in a hotel and have a nice meal and all that kind of stuff. You're really not a tourist. You're kind of not a passenger, and you're a participant. I like that. As far as I forgot to mention one other thing, that I find that I understand that you people are engineers, and you're used to the term payload, which was a new term to me. And when I go to Oklahoma City, I have met every one of those people there, and I think they have over 60 employees now, so I'm getting one confused with the other. But when I am there, I walk in and I introduce myself, I shake hands, I hug every one of those men and women, and I say, "Hi, I am Reda Anderson. I may look like payload to you, but I look like a human to me. And my only acceptable risk is to come back in equal or better condition than when I went up there." So every time you make a little drawing on your little lines, you engineers or whatever, your little designs and things, I want you to live and breathe the name Reda Anderson, so you have that in your mind. And and the last thing, just for kicks, I want to tell you is when down, you were talking about pressure and the, something to do with the hull or something. When you go down to the Titanic, at the bottom of the ocean where that is, 12,500 feet, the PSI is 5,500 PSI, pounds per square inch. So what they do before you go down is you take these cups, just a standard coffee cup, you put designs on them and things, and then they have these and they put them on the outside of the submersible so that they're not pressurized. When you come back up, this is what the cup looks like. So if there was anything that it's distorted and it's reduced in size, and if anything happens to you on the Titanic, you get a pinprick in the hull. That's what your body will look like.
And that is the best way to get informed consent. This is your brain at 12,000 feet below sea level. And sign here, please. But we want you to read the form. If you don't read the form, it isn't truly informed consent. I have one comment to Reda, and then I'll get to Sam. Reda wants the people, the rocket plane engineers, thinking every time they do a drawing, think Rita Anderson. We go one better. They're going to ride on the vehicle. So when they do the drawing, it's them. And as Jeff puts it, this has a salutary effect on design decisions. Sam?
Can you answer Ken's question about how you model the safety? And in particular, if you have only one engineer in a particular area of expertise, how do you model that person's possible modeling error? And a second question is, how do you model the human error to go with the equipment failure?
I'm not sure I can take two questions at the same time. It's kind of early. But, well, to answer your first question, how do we deal with having only one engineer in a particular area? I don't know. We don't do that. We don't have that degree of specialization. Everybody works on everything. People have different areas of specialty, but one of the ways we do safety at XCOR is that we have design reviews literally every day. And safety is I'm involved in most of them. Safety is brought up in every one of them. How do we know this is going to be safe? How can this fail? What are the effects? There's an analysis called a failure modes and effects analysis, and it's FMEA. And there's an ASME standard for that, and we do FMEA as part of every design review. We do it every day. There isn't anything going into any vehicle that hasn't been FMEA'd 30 times. We're just exhaustive. And what was your second question?
How do you model human error?
Oh, how do we model human error and modeling error? Well, we don't model human error. We do it. Really, that's the simple answer. We test so much that by the time we get the airplane in the air, for example, we've tested the propulsion system a couple of hundred times. We've tested components of the propulsion system thousands of times. When you test that much, you make a lot of mistakes, just in the nature of being human. And we're constantly refining the procedures and doing design flaws. We had an anomaly on the test stand a couple weeks ago where we had a Teflon hose that failed because we were using it in a stupid way. And so we changed that design on the test stand. It never was part of the airplane design. We make mistakes and we learn from them. And we think that's a good approach to safety.
we've got to, I'm sorry, get switched over to the session. So
Okay.
I want to thank Reda and Randal, Ken. Thank you very much. This has been most illuminating. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.